Hi, my name is Hamza and I'm the director of The Brick, and I'm here with the artist Elizabeth Paige Smith. So the title of the exhibition is Unshade, Me of You, and I was wondering, Betsy, if you could talk about where the title comes from.
Sort of comes from a deep past, reflection, and awareness outside of the process of making things. In the shade sometimes can be quite a safe space, ironically. And stepping out of that is kind of like throwing yourself off of a cliff with a pretty radical free fall, like moment when you're sort of propelled. You're in a sort of a state of radical freedom. Mm-hmm. And in that, you have decisions to make. Do you want to be exposed? And you're stepping into the light, that you're opening yourself up and your creativity to a lot, and personally and in every way. Unshade, Me of You really just is sort of that introspective question, is like, do I want to step out and into that light, or do I want to stay in the shadows? Creating in that privacy of your own space for your own self, which I've kind of been doing.
So I'm a big fan of the chairs that Betsy designed. They're such an unlikely combination of materials, methods, media, right? To do drawing, a very beautifully designed wooden chair, and then to have diary entries written on top of the chair is a very unlikely support for what would otherwise be scribbles or a diary entry of sorts. And then to have it conform to the anthropomorphic nature of the chair, having arms and legs. But to have it be a naked female figure immediately announced itself as being about vulnerability. And the idea of sitting on the chair then, to me, brought up the notion of a lap dance, except the power dynamics and relations are inverted, where the clothed male would sit on top of the naked female.
Yeah, it's the inverted lap dance that really captured my, wow, okay. It's the male gaze. I grew up in a Caribbean culture too, where, there's different ways of expressing and receiving ways of expression. So a lot of these pieces are reflections of, my childhood as, a young woman, having engaged in that sort of suspended manner communications. Sometimes you're left hanging. Sometimes those thoughts, linger for 30 years in your mind, and you think back okay, yeah, tangled hair, fragrant lies. And no, it's not tangled in the brain. It's like a mass of memory and emotion each one of us carries with us. I created a series titled Naked and Fucking Free, and that originated up in the Bay Area when I was living in a little bit of isolation amongst a lot of boulders, and had this opportunity to really engage and disconnect from LA. And I was up there for about a decade. These are the products of some of that experience, and really they're just the embodiment of my own experience, where you're really away from anyone else's gaze. You're out of judgment, you're away from society and everything pretty much that we're all reacting to on a daily basis. I had the privilege of being in nature. And so the Naked and Fucking Free series, these girls, they're in their own pure expression of just being.
So the title of these acrylic triangle pieces is Untamed, which I think is quite a appropriate title, given how they were made with very bright day-glow pigment that is simply tossed and turned inside of a triangular acrylic box. But it produces pretty much an abstract expressionist painting on the inside surface of the plexiglass, about trying to tame, contain.
Through the power and the monument of color, I'm aiming to bring people in and bring themselves in. And it's interesting to see how each and every person, what kind of way they're aroused. There's a lot of power in color, and it's something that unfortunately we're losing. Having been raised in the Cayman Islands, I virtually grew up underwater. The monuments of color really are inspired by the color of the corals and the fish. It's something that we're sadly losing.
So this is one of the Untamed series that's made with metallic pigment, and it reminds me of Andy Warhol's oxidation paintings, as they're called, aka the piss paintings, which are a really beautiful series of works where he urinated onto a copper or metallic pigment, and then it turned a beautiful series of blues and greens as the pigment oxidized. And these pieces recall in terms of how the pigment is caught onto the other side of the plexi, kinds of patterns that form and variations in the tones recall that body of work.
Like color and density and the magic of suspension. These pieces are inspired by peripheral observations. He has like these kind of acid psychedelic mushrooms that I have found on the land around my property. They're also drawing a lot of connections to one of my heroes, William Burroughs, who was always saying kind of tune in, drop out. So I named them Drop Out. I have a setup at my studio where I can do the laminations for the resins. So this is an example of my resin layup with powder pigments, fiberglass. I start with designing these plywood forms, and then it's basically practice of layering, removal, layering, and dealing with opacity and translucency.
Yes, so these pair were some of the last works that Betsy made for the show. And it was nice to see them come into being. I mean, the work is very, very intuitive, and the way that she juxtaposes unlikely objects, and in this case, the heads of young women that she sculpted out of terracotta, and then a rose stone, which is a naturally occurring form, but the way that she substituted that for the face, and then enlarged it, I found really just intriguing. I mean, it's an archetypal piece of surrealism.